Hi, Lou Pulsifer here to try to answer the question, what do people do at game conventions and game conferences? Well, one of the first questions would be, who is the gathering for? A convention is for both the makers and the players of games, usually tabletop games. A conference is just for makers of games and for those who want to be. And it's usually video games, though there are a few tabletop game designer conventions, or gatherings as they're often called. They're not called conferences by the tabletop people. Conference, of course, is a word that's used by academics for their conventions, their conferences, not conventions. And video games have adopted that. So, what do the players do? Well, they play games. They play in tournaments. They play in open gaming, just pick up games. They grab people to go somewhere where the open gaming is and find people to play a game. There's often a library of games there, and they play. And sometimes they play in demos conducted by publisher reps, especially on the exhibit floor. Some of the bigger, I say booths, but they're much bigger than booths, at conventions like Gen Con are there to let people try out games to decide whether to buy them. Now, some people might say, why go to a con to play games? Can't you do that at home? And I confess, I don't go to conventions to play games. But of course, some people don't know or don't have contact with local players, or they want to play the newest and latest game, which is only at the convention, or they want to play old-time games that are out of print and need lots of players, 4, 5, 6, and they have a hard time finding enough of those people to play at home, so they go to convention to play. Many of the people who play in the Britannia tournament at WBC don't get to play Britannia except at conventions. And sometimes they've met people year after year at conventions and they want to play with their long-distance friends who attend the convention. Play games that interest all of them or both of them, as the case may be. But there are less common things to do. See the newest stuff. And in some of the bigger conventions, the newest stuff is there and nowhere else at that time. Well, a lot of times people go to buy games, and at the larger conventions, there are lots of exhibitors selling games. That's not true at conferences, of course. Sometimes they want to listen to people talk about games, whether it's publishers, game designers, researchers, whatever. Sometimes they want to be a game master or GM for an RPG role-playing game, for a tournament board or card game, for special events. Sometimes they want to be a speaker, talk about game topics that interest other people, such as, again, game design or game publishing. Now at conferences, people come to learn more about making games, and that generally is video games. And they may also speak formally about making games, but the presentations are very formal. Usually the presenter has slides that he or she shows. There's lots of competition for speaking slots, so there are more people wanting to speak than there's room for. There are lots of panel discussions, and occasionally there's a hands-on workshop. So it's actually very different, a conference from a convention. In any case, when you go to one of these things, you do whatever you think is fun. I like to talk with people about games, especially people I've come to know over the years by going to conventions. I like to talk with publishers. Occasionally I'll demo or submit a game to a publisher at a convention. It's much easier to do that face-to-face than long distance. Once in a while, I'm able to get expert players to play test a game. My typical play testers, which are University Game Club or occasionally family members, are not generally expert players. And you need to have expert players play test your game because they'll find things that the ordinary players will not. There are connections to other fandoms at conventions and conferences. Interestingly enough, you're more likely to play a video game at a tabletop game convention than at a video game conference. and game cons in general often coexist, especially game conventions, not so much conferences, coexist with other interests such as writing fiction, history, art, comics, cosplay, anime, film, and so forth. There's a trend for really large conventions such as Gen Con and Dragon Con to include all of these. Gen Con was originally just a game convention. Dragon Con is more a fiction convention. And it's a geek interest in general, so as with most geek fandom conventions, a lot is going to go on at night. Participants are often short of sleep. I had a seminar at Gen Con at 9 a.m., which turns out to be a really good time to speak because there isn't much competition. And someone who had come said, "I didn't know 9 a.m. existed," but he was there. So there are interesting things that you can do only at an appropriate convention or conference, and if those attract you, maybe you should go.